Welcome in once again, and for the last time this season, to the most accurate podcast here at 4for4 Fantasy Football. It has been, I don't even know how many weeks because we started a few weeks before the season. Something like 20 plus. Maybe I should have counted. We've done a lot of counting this year, and my head is out of counting space. But we have reached the championships for the vast majority of leagues at least, and we have reached the final week of this podcast because we here at 4for4, there's one article that comes out for week 18, but the vast majority of stuff ends this week because that's when fantasy should end. Hopefully, it is still alive for you going into this week, as I believe it is for John in one spot. John Paulson here with me. How are you doing, John, in this week 17 hurrah, final hurrah?
Matt, it's good to see you. I'm doing pretty well. I am set up in my Santa Barbara hotel up here for a basketball tournament for my son's high school basketball team. But week 17 is, I know it's crucially important to a lot of fantasy managers out there. So we definitely we're going to get this live stream podcast completed today. And I'm on my son's gaming laptop because it's way better than my 2014 MacBook that I have right now. And the dying battery on it. But yeah, everything looks good. I'm ready to roll. Let's do this.
Sweet. All right, we will have, as usual, Q&A at the end of the show. So if you are, by the way, you may not be battling for the fantasy championship, but you may be battling for something important because there are third place matchups that can decide people who, win their money back, their buy-in. And there are also last place matchups that you need to not lose to avoid punishments. So this isn't just for the championship teams, though we hope you're one of them. Drop your questions in the chat if you've got them. Anything besides direct the start sit stuff you can get on 4for4.com with John's rankings. This show may sound a little different for some of it, primarily this first part, because usually we summarize a Thursday night football game. But number one, there was 3 games already played this week because we had 2 games on Christmas Day on Wednesday. And number 2, yesterday's Thursday Night Football game was unironically the worst and least interesting football game I can remember watching, which is saying something. So instead of summarizing those games, also there's nothing to look forward to with these players this year. What there is to look forward to is next year. So I thought we would play a tiny little game, John, before we get to the main hunk of the show, which is I will name a player who has been particularly good this year. Some expected to a degree, but just even better than that. Some having breakouts, particularly down the stretch. And you tell me where you think we will be drafting those players next year. Number one is number one, basically, at the quarterback position. That is Lamar Jackson, who has been unstoppably unbelievable all season through the air, on the ground, MVP level campaign. TBD if he'll win it because Josh Allen's also having one. It seems to often be the case that when a quarterback is really good one year, then maybe they're not quite as good the next year, and we always end up overpaying for them. But where do you think you and or the fantasy community will be drafting Lamar next season?
Well, I think that anytime you ask a question like this, especially for the onesie positions like quarterback or tight end, it depends a lot on how the position is shaping up as a whole. So if there's a QB 12 like Jaden Daniels, who I wanted to target as much as possible this year, then I'm less likely to pull the trigger on an early round quarterback unless they were to slip a round or two, and I feel like I was getting good value. That being said, if we're just in a vacuum and it's kind of a normal, let's say there isn't a QB 10 through 15 that I really want, I think is the best value on the board, then I would look at Lamar Jackson as probably a 2-3 turn third rounder. But I mean, Josh Allen is in the mix there as well, and then now we have a lot of good scoring fantasy quarterbacks. So you can make a case for Jaden Daniels being in the top 4 or 5 rounds next year as well. So, and I agree with what you're saying about how we tend to overdraft the number 1 quarterback in the following year. It's a bit of a disappointment, and I think the part of the reason for that is that things have to go really well for that player in the year that they're having an MVP season or having the number one overall fantasy season, and that luck tends to wear out. There's some regression to the mean, and so we end up with a bit of a disappointment. Sometimes they're QB5 or 6, and it feels really disappointing.
Yeah. I have 0 shares of Lamar anywhere this entire season, and it's made me sad. So hopefully I can get a piece or two next year.
Yeah,
All right.
I actually had him in Scott Fishbowl, and I've got him in our
That's
best
right.
ball. Yeah, so I had him several. I was targeting him because I felt like, and this is where you can sometimes make up some ground or get a good value, is the bottom guy in a tier, and I feel like he was being overshadowed by the quarterbacks that were going ahead of him, whereas his upside is as high as anybody's.
Yep. All right, I got a running back. Now, this one I think is especially interesting because he started the year unbelievably hot, was one of the best backs in fantasy for a long stretch, and then has kind of fallen off over the last maybe month or two. The offense has been a little interesting. The quarterback play has been a little interesting, especially compared to what we expected, and that is Joe Mixon, obviously of the Houston Texans now, one of the many running backs to land in a new spot and be really good, at least for a while. So do you buy more into the early season excellence, the late season downswing? What's your expectation for Mixon, and we'll draft him next year?
Well, I think heading into the season, we kind of looked at Mixon as likely the same way we looked at him in Cincinnati, which is that he was kind of the compiler. He would get a lot of touches, not a particularly efficient. I mean, he's a good running back, but he's not like a giant tackle breaker or breaks off a lot of big runs like Derrick Henry does, or Saquon Barkley for that matter. So I would view him as, these touch floor guys where we're drafting these touches in the middle rounds. I don't think he'll slip past the fourth round. It sort of depends again on how many running backs we have coming in and how healthy everybody is. But I would think a third or fourth rounder for him is probably where his ADP is going to land. That feels a little like third feels a little early. Fourth would be certainly like doable because maybe you can use him as your RB1 if you've drafted a couple of receivers in the first 2 rounds, or he's your RB2 in the fourth round. That sounds pretty good to me.
I like it. All right. We have another breakout. This one's a real breakout, though. A big breakout who has been, for the most part, pretty incredible over the latter half of the season. That is Jackson Smith and Jigba, to the detriment of DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett, who it feels like have entirely disappeared over the last month or so. But JSN has looked amazing, has become, at least for the latter half of this season, the clear number one in Seattle. Geno Smith, throwing the ball a lot this season. Maybe not the most effective or efficient quarterback in the league, but it's good for his top receiver, and his top receiver has been JSN. So assuming most stays the same heading into next year, where do you think JSN will be drafted?
Yeah, I mean, I had JSN usurping one of my favorite receivers, Tyler Lockett, this year. I did not have him taking over the wide receiver 1 role from DK Metcalf. I think that was a bit of a surprise to the fantasy community, given Metcalf's like physical stature and upside and everything. So, you're looking at JSN as like a top 10 receiver this year, which I think was a big surprise. So I think he probably lands in that. I mean, I would like to be able to grab him in the 4th, 5th round, but I think he might end up in that 3rd, 4th round, where it seems a little rich if Metcalf is still there and could have a bounce back season and maybe be the number 1 fantasy receiver there. It does seem like the OC likes JSN, likes featuring JSN, and JSN has certainly grabbed that role and is producing. And I don't, if there is no change at quarterback or offensive coordinator, and I don't think there will be, then I think he probably will remain the number 1 receiver there in Seattle.
Yeah, the team is 9-7, still very much in the playoff hunt. So it seems like they're going in somewhat the right direction, and JSN has been a big part of that. All right, last one, and this one I think might be the most interesting because it might be the toughest. Xavier Worthy, who for the first part of the season was super inconsistent, did have some big games. I believe he had 2 touchdowns in his first game, if I remember correctly, way back 80 years ago in week 1. but he has come on pretty consistently of late, which is somewhat surprising, especially considering they've only continued to add receivers. But obviously, highly drafted rookie, very explosive. Thought he might just be like a Mecole Hardman 2.0 after the first part of the season where he seemed to be Mecole Hardman 2.0, but has been a little better than that. How high do you think he could get in drafts in 2025?
Well, I think a lot of this has to do with the status of Rashee Rice heading into next season. They have a lot of receivers now, but I think some of them may move on. I don't know. I think Hopkins is on a one-year deal, and so is Marquise Brown.
Yeah.
So the receiver room could look very different. It might just be down to Rice and Xavier Worthy and whoever else they have there. Rice seems to me like the number one receiver when healthy, but he is coming off of a pretty significant knee injury. I'm interested to see. Like I did see some reports that he might even be able to make it back to the playoffs, but I don't know if that's even feasible. If that's the case, then I think week 1 of next year looks pretty good, and he should have a full off season. We'll see. So this is all to be determined with Worthy, because I think he is probably not who they want to be featuring in this role. Like when Rice is healthy, he's been the guy, but he has grown. Worthy has, and he's been a really, like, the last 6 weeks or so has been a really productive fantasy receiver. It just felt so spotty for the first half of the season that you really couldn't count on his targets, but it's been coming pretty consistently lately.
Been surprising, but a good surprise for anyone who's rostered him. All right, that was a look ahead. Let's get into a look ahead to this week, because this is the week of decision, and it will decide who wins your championship or who doesn't lose your losers bracket, which is, some might say, more important. First, quickly, some big news, just top level, not specifically for this week, but long term. CeeDee Lamb was shut down for the season by the Cowboys with the shoulder injury. This doesn't really matter all that much in terms of the long-term perspective. They were out of playoff contention. He has been battling it for a while and battling through it pretty impressively. But he will be out, which means you've got Brandon Cooks, Jalen Tolbert, no true wide receiver one by any means for the Cowboys. Do you have someone you trust to step up for this week?
Not against the Eagles. I mean, if they were playing Tampa or something, then you could really throw Brandon Cooks out there, or Tolbert maybe. But I think Cooks is a decent dart throw. Like they have to throw to somebody, Cooper Rush. So Cooks is the most accomplished receiver, but really we don't have any clear data that shows that he's going to be the number one receiver with CeeDee Lamb out and is going to see more targets than any of these other guys. So I would not feel confident, but certainly everybody gets bumped up a peg, and Cooks, we've seen him do it before, and even though he's had kind of a tough season injury wise, he might be able to do it. But I guess in this matchup against the Eagles, I wouldn't count on it.
Yeah, it's probably not going to be the closest game between the Cowboys and Eagles in this one. All right. This one is interesting, not injury related, so we get to it now. But Jerod Mayo has said that the Patriots would consider, or it is a possibility, that Ramondre Stevenson would be benched, at least as the starter, for Antonio Gibson. He's had some Stevenson has had some fumbling issues recently, has not been all that good or all that efficient. It's hard to make any decisions based off of this, but does it take the already not particularly consistent Stevenson and take him out of starter contention for fantasy, in your opinion?
Well, it's certainly worrisome, and the way that, I mean, he hasn't lost a fumble. I mean, he had one last week, but the last one that he lost was week 4. But then he might have put the ball on the ground a few times and not lost it, and that's why he has a fumbling problem. It's not like Antonio. I think we had this conversation before. It's not like Antonio Gibson is some great secure of
paragon
the ball. Paragon of ball security. Certainly, if you're depending on Ramondre. It's a little dicey. I have yet to adjust for this discussion that he might get benched, because the last time I believe this happened, he sat out the first series and then came back in and had the most touches for the game. So it was more of a slap on the wrist type of a thing. I don't know if they're going to do the same thing, or if they're now going to hand the keys to Antonio Gibson and really punish Stevenson for a full game. Last time they didn't. So I probably will have him ranked a little bit lower than where I do right this second, which I think is RB21 in that range. And I'm a little bit worried about his touch floor with this conversation. Otherwise it's a pretty good matchup against the Chargers, who are getting a little leaky against the run. I think it's 4.7 yards per carry allowed by the Chargers. So there is some upside here for whoever's carrying the ball for the Patriots.
3 fumbles in his last 5 games, only the 1 lost. So you would expect that's where it comes from. But as you noted, the punishment may not be all that severe or the entirety of the game. Maybe takes him from RB2 range to flex range, but still potentially startable. And then last thing of note here, Tank Dell tore or dislocated everything in his knee. ACL, MCL, LCL, has meniscus damage, dislocated the knee. It is awful, and it most likely, the healing has changed in recent, and surgeries have gotten better, and all this. ACL recoveries in particular have been good in recent years, but with all of this damage, it seems like it is quite likely he will miss all of 2025, or at least a vast majority of it. So that's obviously tough for anybody who really likes Tank Dell, tough for Tank Dell, tough for the Texans, tough for anyone who has Tank Dell in Dynasty, if you care about Dynasty. Yeah, it's gonna be interesting. And then Stephon Diggs is also going to be slated for free agency coming off of his injury. So it'll be very interesting to see what the Texans do. Not much we can know about what it'll look like by that point, but just thought everybody should know. And if you play in Dynasty, you can expect to be without Tank Dell. All right, let's get to some this week injury stuff. Lots of important ones. Jalen Hurts, with his concussion, is unlikely to start for the Eagles, which means Kenny Pickett, who also got injured last week with a rib injury but should be okay, is expected to be the starter. He practiced in full on Thursday. So this is not final yet, but it's looking very likely that Hurts will not start and that Pickett will. We saw a good portion of a game with Pickett last week. What do you expect is the fallout for the pass catchers? A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, anybody else of importance there? Or even for Saquon, if there is one.
Yeah, so this is one of those situations where it's bad for the Eagles, very bad for the Eagles to go from Jalen Hurts to Kenny Pickett. It may not be so bad for the pass catchers to go from Jalen Hurts to Kenny Pickett, not because Pickett is better than Jalen Hurts, but the volume might be higher. And if the volume's higher, then even a downgrade in the efficiency of each target doesn't matter as much if they're throwing 30% more passes or something like that. I don't think that maybe that's going to be the case, but the Cowboys are kind of a loosey-goosey defense these days. Kenny Pickett, I'm just looking at his career. 6.2 yards per attempt. He averaged 185 yards passing, 172 yards passing in 2 seasons as the starter for Pittsburgh. 13 total touchdowns and 13 total interceptions over 24 starts. So not great from that aspect. He did and I don't know how much. I think Hurts went out really early last week, so yeah. Antonio Brown ended up having a really good game anyway. So that is at least Pickett knows to target it. I'm not sorry, did I say Antonio Brown? AJ Brown, target him heavily. So that, all that being said, I'm still starting AJ Brown. I think Devonta Smith is probably a little more dicey, but it's really hard to bench AJ Brown in fantasy playoffs after the season he's had, which has been pretty strong.
One small note, not that you need any encouragement to start Saquon Barkley in your fantasy league, but maybe you're playing daily or something. I don't know if you saw this tweet and or if it was ever, what is it called on Blue Sky? It's like yeeted or something. Skeeted.
No, we're not doing skeet.
We're not doing skeet. Okay.
I just call them posts.
Post.
So I'm just gonna go with posts.
Michael F. Florio, not the news Florio, but the Michael Florio from NFL Fantasy, actually my coworker, tweeted, this was back on December 9th, so the stats have probably changed a little bit. But Saquon Barkley at that point had been tackled at the 1-yard line 11 times, which was the most in the league. 10 of those had become Jalen Hurts rushing touchdowns, and 0 had become Saquon Barkley touchdowns, which is absurd. Actually insane. One of the craziest stats I've heard this year. You figure that the Eagles offense is maybe not quite as good at getting to the 1-yard line, but with Saquon Barkley and the Cowboys defense, I don't know if it matters all that much. And you have to imagine that his chances of scoring a rushing touchdown, particularly from the goal line, skyrocket with Hurts out. So maybe you're looking at the Saquon Barkley rushing touchdown or anytime touchdown lines. And yeah. Cardinals running backs. There's been a lot of hoopla about this coming into the week because all of them seem to be hurt coming out of last week. James Conner suffered a knee injury. Trey Benson suffered an ankle injury. Amari DeMarcado was already on IR. And it was looking like Michael Carter might be a waiver pickup to play. As of now, it looks like James Conner is expected to play. Quick recovery, good for him. So he obviously goes back to being the number one. If the expectation is missed here, Trey Benson's status is a little more up in the air. So yeah, you can have him as your backup, but it looks like Michael Carter might be the more likely to play backup. Obviously, if Connor plays, you're not playing anybody else. If by some miracle Connor does not play and Benson does, how high does he get for you? And if by some miracle both don't play and Carter does, is he in the same range? Just in case.
Yeah, I think I probably would treat injured Benson, or questionable Benson, and a healthy Carter about the same. And I don't know that if Connor were to sit, that Benson would see the lion's share of the touches necessarily if he's banged up and Carter's healthy. So I think we were in a pretty ugly. It could be if Benson does play and Connor doesn't, it could be a pretty ugly committee there, and they could go hot hand or just see how Benson is doing with his injury. Generally speaking, I think it looks like Connor's trending the correct way, and he's going to be playing against the Rams. I have him at 17. No one else is playable if he's healthy, just due to his overwhelming dominance of that backfield, and certainly Benson also being questionable doesn't help his status at all.
No. Cardinals already eliminated, but have a chance to mess up the Rams season, so that's what they're playing for. In the Saints case, that's a little. There's really nothing to fight for here. Alvin Kamara is unlikely to play in Week 17 with his knee injury. Has not practiced so far this week. Missed the last week, and there just does not seem like any good reason to rush him back. So it's looking very likely that he will not play, which means it will most likely be Kendre Miller at the head again. Easier opponent this week. They face the Raiders. The Saints offense, though, last week was abysmal. Could get absolutely nothing going. And Kendre Miller was getting touches and not looking that bad when he did, but it's just hard to trust a running back in an offense that incompetent. Before I ask you about Kendre, I will also note Chris Olave is practicing in full. So there is a good chance he returns from the concussion that has kept him out for half the season at this point, feels like. I think that actually probably is accurate. Would be kind of surprising, but maybe it would be nice for the Saints to get him back and for him to have a chance to play again. So maybe that helps the offense a little bit. In terms of Kendre Miller, we're assuming Kamara is out. Where do you have him against the Raiders? And then would you trust playing Olave with the quarterback situation with the offense if he is active and teams have held on to him?
So coming out of the Packer game, I was really kind of surprised how much Jordan Mims was playing in this backfield. Like he played 45% of the snaps. Kendry Miller played 39% of the snaps. The touch ratio was Miller 10, Mims 9, and Jamal Williams got a few carries against his old team, played 18% of the snaps. So normally if I'm looking at next week and we have an unproven running back one, which is Miller in this case, maybe his outlook is a little bit improved from the 10 touches that he saw because the Raiders probably will give up more yards, per carry than the Packers did. And the Packers just basically shut down everything. It was 15 carries by the running backs for 39 yards. I haven't seen a good Packer rush defense this good. I mean, it was the Saints, so it's nothing really to write home about. But heading into this week, I'm worried about this split with Mims. So I've got Miller at like RB35. He's more of a desperation RB3 flex type that you're hoping can break out and have a good game, and maybe they feed him a bit more so he can get into that 15 plus touch range, which is what we want when we are, deploying our fantasy running backs. As for
yeah,
Olave, if it was Derek Carr, quarterback, I think things would be much more appealing here. But with Spencer Rattler, who knows what his rapport is with Olave, who's been sidelined, and just this week basically that they've been together. So I wouldn't want to start Olave.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat there. Unfortunate that he missed as much as he did. Fortunate for him that he's back and playing football, it sounds like. Isaac Guerendo, speaking of running backs, foot and hamstring injury that kept him out. He should be back. He practiced Thursday. It sounds like he's trending in the right direction to play on Sunday. To be determined still, so we'll need to check final practice reports and injury report statuses heading into the game. But he should be back at the forefront of this backfield. We did not get much out of Patrick Taylor, as I recall. Do you expect to get more out of Guerendo? Does he go back into like RB2, RB3 conversation?
Yeah, the way they treated him last time, he was sort of gimpy during the week. He came out and I think he had every single touch in that backfield, which was surprising. And that's one of the reasons I was a little worried about Taylor in the lead role, because the 49ers showed no interest in getting him any touches behind Guerendo when Guerendo was iffy. So I think if Guerendo's playing, that he'll get the lion's share of these touches. Maybe they give a few now to Taylor because he's got some more experience in the system and game experience, but I doubt it. I think it'll probably be Guerendo, and he's a low end RB2 in that scenario. I mean, the Lions rush defense is pretty good, and it's just they just don't allow a lot of rush attempts because they're typically leading in the games, and teams have to go pass happy to sort of catch up. So it's not a great situation, but Guerendo does do some work as a receiver, so he can get there both ways. So that's why he's as high as 2021 in the rankings.
Christian Watson is not practicing, at least as of Thursday, with a knee injury. Although the Packers are being kind of vague about it. Had some good news, and then he wasn't a practice on Thursday, so it's a little tough to figure out what to expect from him. Maybe you have some secret Green Bay insights. But I guess just what is your take on the situation? Romeo Doubs and Dontavian Wicks both should be good. Dobbs was back last week, I believe, after missing several games with a concussion. They face the Minnesota Vikings, which should be hopefully one of the best and most exciting games of the year, super important one, and B, is quite a good matchup for receivers. So how are you breaking down this wide receiver room?
Dobbs came back in week 15, had the 2 touchdown game against Seattle, 40 yards, and he had 2 for 20 last week and 3 targets against New Orleans. So that's the roller coaster of Romeo Dobbs season continues in terms of fantasy production. So what I think will happen is if Watson is available, that he's just going to be out there for a few routes where they want to take deep shots, or at least stress, get him on the field so that the defense has to account for him deep and then open things up for his teammates. So there's a chance that he could catch a long one or two. Depends on how he's feeling. It sounds like it's just a knee bruise as opposed to anything structurally wrong, which was, he's the one guy in that receiving core that no one else has the same skill set as him because no one else is as fast as him. So having him at least available out there for 20, 30 routes is nice because the defense is scared to run with him. And that opens things up for other people. So if he's not active, it means he wouldn't be able to open it up and run at the speed that he wants to. And that means you're going to see a lot of Dontavian Wicks and Dobbs and Reed. And I would think that all three are viable, even though it really does depend on how well Josh Jacobs and the running game can operate against a very good Vikings rush defense. But sometimes, this is like one of the best rushing attacks right now in the NFL against one of the best rushing defenses in the NFL. And Matt LaFleur has not shown that he's going to back down. It's going to take a few 2-3 yard, 0-yard runs by Josh Jacobs for him to really give up on the running game right now, because that's what's led to a lot of these wins. And yes, he's got a quarterback who can play. Yes, the matchup is better, and he might decide, okay, well, we're going to come out and act like we're going to run the ball, a lot of play action, or hit Josh Jacobs a few times, but we're going to throw it, we're going to air it out because that's where our advantage is. That would probably be the smart thing to do. But what's gotten them to this point is Josh Jacobs and this running game in terms of being where they are in terms of wins and locking up a playoff spot. So I think they're going to try it, and we'll see how it goes and then adjust from there. But it would be fun if for Dobbs, Reed, Wicks, anybody who starts them, if all of a sudden Jordan Love comes out and attempts 40 passes or 45 passes or something in this game in the Dome, because that would be, I think, a surprise to the Vikings.
Yeah, that's what I'm rooting for, but we'll see. Malik Neighbors, couple things from the Giants. Malik Neighbors considers himself a, quote, game day decision with a foot injury, which is interesting. And then Tyrone Tracy, who has an ankle injury, did not practice on Thursday, is at risk of missing the game. Brian Daboll said that he is hopeful about both Tracy and Neighbors, that they will play against the Colts. Obviously, they are well beyond out of contention for anything except the number 1 overall pick, which might suggest you just sit your young stars and not push them too hard. But, teams want to win, I guess. Players want to win. So you'll need to monitor both these situations, basically. Devin Singletary becomes very interesting if Tyrone Tracy sits. How high for you do you think?
Well, you don't want to go crazy with the Giants or anybody really involved with the Giants at this point in the season, but this is a pretty good matchup against the Colts, who have been a little rough against the running backs this year. They're 20th in adjusted fantasy points allowed the position. I've given up some yards in the ground game. I've got Tracy at 24, and I think that's probably a fair spot for Singletary because of the touch floor he probably would have with Tracy out. I don't think Eric Gray is necessarily going to have a giant role. They may just go ahead and lean on Singletary, and you're going to get your 15 to 20 touches out of him, and that's a pretty good for a spot start is a pretty good touch floor. As for Neighbor, we're in a situation where you got to really be on your toes and be prepared for this. Look at the game schedules. Look at when these teams are playing. Make sure you have backup plans for these guys that are questionable, because especially for the Giants, because it's in their best interest to lose, even if in the short term it makes everybody feel bad. But yeah, they want that number. They want that number 1. I know the GM wants that number 1 overall pick, and what he can do with it. So be on your toes. Make sure you have a backup plan in place in case Neighbors has to sit, because he is a top 15, 20 option whenever he's healthy. But I'll tell you, the one thing you said that always makes me nervous is when coaches say they're hopeful about a player playing, because almost always, I wouldn't say 100%, but 90%, 85, 90% of the time, hopeful questionables don't play.
Yeah, I would agree there. Worth noting, Wan'Dale Robinson in the 2 games that Neighbors has missed this year had 10 targets per game, 13 PPR fantasy points per game, which is a good bit more than he has with Neighbors in. Amusingly, on those 10 targets, 5.5 catches for 43 yards was his average. So that's the most Wan'Dale Robinson thing I've ever heard. He's really only playable in PPR, and even there, you don't have the highest of ceilings, but worth pointing out. Gus Edwards is out with an ankle injury for the Chargers. They are optimistic that J.K. Dobbins, with his knee injury, will actually be back and play. That one's not for sure. So if he also doesn't play, it would be Kimani Vidal, theoretically. So give me your thoughts on the situation either way, because we know Edwards is out. If Dobbins is in, how excited are you about him? And I assume Vidal becomes not playable in fantasy. If Dobbins is also out, how high is Vidal for you?
Yeah, Dobbins I have at 23 right now. And just to give a little insight as to how I came up with that ranking, I basically took his distributions when he was healthy and multiplied them by the injury index number for a player returning from knee injury, which we found 444 injury index minus 18% performance against, coming back from a knee injury, unspecified knee injury. So basically 0.82 times all of his distributions, 82% of his distributions. So that's 82% of his production. Now, if you think that he's healthier than that or can do better than that, then you might want to bump him up in your rankings or whether or not you start him. Right now, I have him at RB23. The matchup is pretty good against the Patriots. You could argue that he should be at maybe 18, 19, somewhere in there. But when I just put in his year-to-date distributions, he came in RB 15 or 14. So that's sort of, if he were fully healthy and I was confident, that's where it would be. He's questionable. So he's obviously not 100%. And do they now also work in Vidal in order to sort of limit Dobbins in his first game back? This is a team that still has playoff contention. If I remember their record correctly, are they?
Yep.
Yeah. So they're probably looking at Dobbins like, okay, he's gonna, with Gus Edwards sidelined. We need Dobbins for the playoffs. They probably don't want to overload him in this game, certainly in his first game back, until he's proven that he can handle it. So that's where I'm at with Dobbins. And if Dobbins were to sit, then I think you can start Vidal with extreme prejudice in this one. I think he will probably be in the top 15, top 18. If it's just the only thing that's uncertain is that we just haven't seen him in a lead role and whether or not he can produce. But this is a good matchup, and there's not a whole lot after him in terms of competition for touches.
Dobbins, in the 4 games Edwards missed that he was healthy this year, 15.9 half PPR fantasy points versus 12.6 when Edwards was in. 17.5 rush attempts per game, 4 touchdowns in 4 games. So that's pretty nice. And the good matchup, as long as he's healthy, which is the big question. Last couple things quickly here. Cade Otton is out. This is brand new news. Out versus Carolina, which is really unfortunate because they have been extremely soft against tight ends. Except Trey McBride, because obviously Trey McBride would face the worst tight end matchup or the best tight end matchup, depending on how you look at it, in the league and have his worst game in week 16. I'm not sad at all. But he is out, and Sterling Shepard is also out. So this means Mike Evans and Jalen McMillan to the moon, it would seem like. Evans, has he not hit his 1,000 yards yet, has he? Do you remember?
You're asking the wrong guy. I'm not on my PC.
He is at 818 yards with 2 games remaining. So you can expect them to push for that as far as records you actually care about pushing your players for. That's a pretty big one. But between him and Jalen McMillan, how are you viewing this situation, and does it affect Baker at all that 2 of his top 4-ish guys are out?
Well, he's got a couple of good pass catching running backs, Bucky Irving and Rashad White. So he's got enough to work with, I think, especially against the Panthers, 28th in adjusted fantasy points allowed to the quarterback position. Yeah, I do think that McMillan is very much alive. wide receiver 3 type. He's remained pretty hot. And then Evans, I have it wide receiver 5. I mean, the one maybe concern here is, I mean, Carolina's playing better, so I'm not too concerned that they won't be able to keep it somewhat competitive against a pretty shaky Tampa defense. But those are really, I mean, you got Bucky Irving in the top 10. You got Evans in the top 10. You've got, McMillan, who's very startable, but those are really the only guys that you really want to start. And maybe you can work Rachaad White in there in the flex. Maybe he's in a 10-touch role with like 6 catches or something. That would be pretty nice for him. But there really is nowhere to go. Payne Durham is their tight end. Not appealing. But everybody else is pretty good start.
And speaking of that Bucks Panthers game, Adam Thielen popped up on Thursday's injury report with a hamstring injury. Do not have much else beyond that in terms of status, questionability, practice reports. So you'll need to keep an eye on that later today, and today being Friday, and tomorrow to figure out what to do there. If he's out, Jalen Coker, I guess this is a very good matchup. We'll get to that, so I won't spoil it. And before we get to that, we'll hear from PrizePicks because we haven't done that yet. And then get some snazzy picks from John.
Hey everyone, John Paulson here. We know there are a ton of options out there for real money sports action, but we have found one that really stands out from the rest. PrizePicks, with over 10 million members and billions of dollars in awarded winnings, PrizePicks has made daily fantasy sports accessible to everyone. It's easy to play, and now you can win up to 100 times your money on PrizePicks with as few as 4 correct picks. PrizePicks is also the only real money daily fantasy platform with an injury insurance policy. They call it the Reboot. So your lineups stay in play even if one of your players gets injured. If you sign up today, you'll get $50 instantly when you play $5, and that $50 bonus is guaranteed whether you win or not. PrizePicks is the best way to win real money this football season. Which players are going off, which ones aren't. Make your picks in less than 60 seconds and turn your sports opinions into real money all season long on PrizePicks. I play PrizePicks weekly, and I'll have a couple of my favorite plays for you after the break. So download the app today and use TMAP, T-M-A-P, to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Again, just download the PrizePick app. Use the promo code TMAP, T-M-A-P, to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. PrizePicks, run your game.
Last
chance to make listeners some money. What do you got, John?
Yeah. Last week, the Bucky Irving, I always remember when I win. Bucky Irving, James Conner, overs, both, I guess they're called more thans. Both came in, won that one. So I'm going back to the well with Bucky Irving against the Panthers. The Panthers, 141 rushing yards allowed to running backs, 5.1 yards per carry. They have allowed a 100-yard rusher, the Panthers have, in 6 of their last 7 games.
Wow.
So the number is only 80.5. So I feel pretty good about it. It is a bit high for Bucky because he's been sort of hovering in that 60 to 70 range in terms of the lines. But he's one of the hottest. Like, I'm going to draft a lot of Bucky Irving next year, I think. It depends on his cost. But, if he's going in the 3rd, 4th round and we're worried about Rachaad White, like, I don't know. He's single-handedly turned this Bucks rush offense around. They used to not be able to run the ball last year, and now they're running it, at will. So I'm going to go back to the well with Bucky. And the other player I'm going to go more than is James Cook, more than 67.5 rushing yards against the Jets. He has cleared 100 rushing yards in 3 of the last 4 games. He had that weird game against the Rams, I think, that they just basically ignored him. The offense did, and I don't know what happened there.
Weird.
In the last 2 games, the Jets gave up 122 rushing yards to Kyron Williams, and 65, which isn't above this number, but it's Travis Etienne, who was splitting time with Tank Bigsby, who had 43 yards. So I think the Jets rush defense is, kind of trending downward. And this is a game where James Cook, I think, can clear this number fairly easily. And you might want to, there's some, I've heard these prize pick odds on these little devils and goblins and stuff aren't what you're supposed to do per Connor Allen. Like, they're not worth it, but there are some escalator numbers for James Cook that are higher where you get better odds, because like 60 to 77 and 87. he's got a decent chance to post another 100-yard game in this one.
Lucky. I have Bucky Irving on my lone remaining championship team, and my opponent has James Cook. So I'm going to root for at least one success here. Maybe only one success. But all right, let's get to some matchups. Key matchup of the week. I tried not to spoil it too much, but there's been a bunch of interesting names already. I put it as the Panthers and Bucks. Now, there are some more significant games this week for sure. The Packers-Vikings game obviously is going to be a great one. But I feel like Panthers-Bucks has a lot of interesting names. And these defenses are atrocious. Bucks are 32nd against quarterbacks in adjusted fantasy points allowed. Panthers are 28th. Panthers are also 28th against running backs. Bucks are 13th, which isn't bad. And they're both terrible against tight ends. So the main question here is, who do you not play? Because it seems like it's viable to maybe play everyone. We know you're playing Bucky. Are you also playing Rachaad White? And then we know you're playing Evans, and it sounds like also McMillan. Anybody else in that pass catching group for Tampa Bay? And then with Thielen's questionable nature, anybody in the pass catching group for Carolina? Obviously, you're starting Chuba Hubbard.
Yeah, Chuba is your rock solid. I think Thielen is pretty good if he's available. He's been very productive since returning from injury and does have a nice rapport with Bryce Young. Bryce Young in like a super flex league, I think you could start him. Certainly, it's a nice matchup. He's played better. I would be a little hesitant in a one quarterback league to want to stream all the way down to QB 22 or whatever he's at in my rankings. But the matchup's great. You could hang your hat on that. You could also hang your hat on the fact that the Bucs offense is probably going to jump out to a lead, and the Panthers are going to have to throw the ball. Coker maybe in a deeper league. Coker, if Thielen is out, would get a pretty significant bump. You mentioned Hubbard; he's his must start. And then I think we already talked about the Bucs. I'm trying to think if there's anybody else. There's really no tight end on the Panthers that I trust. Leggett coming off of injury, I don't really wouldn't want to go that route. So I think you're really looking at Hubbard, Thielen, and maybe Coker for the Panthers.
Roger. I have some strong hopes in Bryce Young this week, but sometimes we can get excited about a streamer because they have an amazing matchup and they should be much better than they normally are. But much better than Bryce Young normally is doesn't necessarily mean starter worthy. Although, as you said, he has been better. I like him. Don't know if I'm going to be starting him in any normal sized leagues. All right, and then the fade of the week. The Raiders at Saints is gross. That is the 3-12 Raiders against the 5-10 Saints, and most of those Saints 5 wins came very, very early in the year when they had a quarterback and a pass catching group, and a second quarterback who also plays tight end. Their over/under is at 39.5. You're playing Jacoby Myers and Brock Bowers, I think, right? Okay, good. But outside of that, what are you willing to trust here? One of the Raiders running backs. We talked to Saints running backs a little bit, so that we've covered. Olave you don't like, even if he's healthy. So is there a receiver that you'll play, or is this just largely hands off? Outside of
there's really nobody for the Saints that I'm comfortable with. Desperate managers might have to throw a Juwan Johnson out there or a Kendra Miller out there, but it's just who knows what you're going to get out of Spencer Rattler in the passing game. It could be anybody. Dante Pettis, I think, was like his number one receiver last week against the Packers. Like, if it's Olave, maybe you're sitting there and you're like, okay, my number 4 receiver is ranked in the 60s. I might as well throw a talented guy out there and hope that he and Rattler can get it together. For the Raiders, you mentioned Brock Bowers. I mean, he's a rock solid. Like, I have big regrets in my keeper league.
Same.
Drafting Mark Andrews over Brock Bowers. That was a Paulson mistake there. But Andrews has come back, but Brock Bowers is the nice thing about Brock Bowers too is that the seas have parted for him. Devontae Adams got traded away. The other, I can't even remember the other, Michael Mayer
Yeah.
was gone for most of the season, is back, and so Browers has been able to just entrench himself as the number one target there in that passing attack. And if they get a quarterback, watch out. Anyway, Myers is decent, volume guy, but not a big touchdown guy. Is certainly in this one an okay start. And then at running back, you asked, Amir Abdullah was a sneaky start last week. I had him ranked ahead of Alexander Madison, which I think I was definitely in the minority. But if you look at what he's been doing as a receiver, 7 catches for 58 yards 2 weeks ago. It's against Atlanta, 5 for 47 last week. He scored 4 touchdowns in his last 6 games. And he's the one sort of benefiting from, he's got at least 10.7 PPR fantasy points in 4 of his last 6. He's benefiting from this, dearth of receivers that they don't have in Las Vegas. I mean, he's basically the number 2 receiver, or number 3 after Bowers and Myers. He does get some carries too. He had a rushing touchdown last week. So, desperate managers might want to throw him out there. I think he's right now is a better, more effective running back than Alexander Madison.
Saints run defense has been abysmal, so possibly could take advantage of that.
Madison could, pop his head up for a 12 to 15 carry, 70-yard touchdown game. I would rather bet on the pass catching of Abdullah, and he does get some carries as well.
It's also nice for starting Raiders running backs when the team they're playing against might be one of the only teams they can reliably beat in the entire NFL. Although, who knows what's going to happen in that game. Also, quick, tiny bit of update news. I just saw a break. Adam Thielen is clear for Week 17. So he is your guy against the Bucs. Just out of curiosity, I don't know if you had him ranked as if he would play already, but how high for you is he? Clear.
Yeah, he's an interesting guy because he came in when I just gave him his distributions from his return. He came in the top 15 or 18, if I remember correctly, and I had to move him down a bit to. He's at wide receiver 22 right now. Okay. So he's ahead of George Pickens and Keenan Allen, who already had bad games. Ahead of DJ Moore, who also had a bad game. So far, so good on that front, I guess. I think he's a confident start, especially just given the way he's played, and it's a good matchup against the Bucs.
All right. Let's get into some positional matchups. At quarterback, the good, worth noting, Bo Nix faces the Bengals, who are 26th in AFPA, and have been a nice matchup because they also score a lot. And then Brock Purdy, who has been kind of up and down, gets the Lions, who are 25th in AFPA. Do both of these guys crack starter range for you, and any other sneaky starts worth noting?
Yeah, I'm still getting. Should I start Bo Nix over this random QB 2-3 type guy? Like this guy is in the top 10. I don't have the exact number, but he was QB 9 at heading into last week, if I remember correctly. He's playing at Cincy, 26 in adjusted fantasy points allowed to the quarterback position. He can run. He's throwing touchdowns. He's not perfect, but he is absolutely generating fantasy points. So I have him at QB 6 this week. Purdy at QB 10. Detroit is a pass funnel. They're 25th in adjusted fantasy points allowed to the quarterback position, and a lot better against the run, 10th against running backs. And they tend to jump out to leads. The 49er defense is not what it once was, so I would expect the Lions to lead in this one as well. Purdy, that means lots of throws for Purdy. I feel pretty good about both those quarterbacks.
On the bad side, Jared Goff, who obviously has been incredible, gets the 49ers, who are sneaky second in AFPA, despite the fact that their defense has been banged up, really banged up. They have been very good against quarterbacks, so that's an interesting one. Matthew Stafford gets the Cardinals, who are 9th in AFPA, and then Tua Tagovailoa gets the Browns in the cold in Cleveland, which he's not been historically very good at, who are 7th in AFPA. Do all of these guys fall out of starter range? It seems like Goff might still stick there because he's been so good.
He has been good. He's a tough one to rank this week because of the matchups, and the 49ers are 25th in adjusted fantasy points allowed to the running back position. So this probably will be a run-heavy game if the Lions are sort of true to form. They tend to attack the defense's weakness. And then Goff, Goff's on the road, outdoors. Has long been documented his struggles. I don't know that that's still as big of a worry given how the Lions offense is humming and how many points they're probably expected to score in this game. I think he's still startable, but I don't think he's top 5 or 6 like he might be if this game were in Detroit. Stafford's fine, at home with Kupp and Puka Nacua healthy. He's been pretty rock solid as a quarterback. Arizona doesn't scare me as far as their pass defense is concerned, 9th against quarterbacks. Tua is a little concerning just because of the weather. This is the time of year when the weather turns in Cleveland and things get kind of ugly. So we got to keep a close eye on that. Tua did fine in the cold against the Packers. He ended up throwing for good numbers. And I don't know if it was you or somebody came up with weren't buying I think it was Connor Allen wasn't buying the Tua is bad in the cold narrative and heading into that game, and it worked out for Connor. Based on his data, it doesn't seem like that's really a thing because of it just depends on how cold you're really getting, because I think anybody's kind of folding in sub 5-degree temperatures. I haven't looked at the weather yet for Cleveland, but this is the time of year we got to start worrying about it.
Yeah. All right, let's get to the running back position. Actually same game. The two I highlighted here from the same game, and they're kind of the same situation actually, is the Titans versus the Jaguars. So on one side you have Tony Pollard and Tyjae Spears, who have been getting a little more mixed and matched lately than earlier in the season. Spears being healthy. Jaguars are 29th in AFPA against running backs. And then on the flip side, you've got Travis Etienne and Tank Bigsby against the Titans, who are dead last in AFPA. So this is an interesting little duo face-off here. How are you shaking out both backfields in terms of fantasy starting?
Well, I think for the first time, I've got Spears ranked ahead of Tony Pollard. We're already looking at 2 DNPs for Pollard. I don't have the information today, but just based on that and based on how Spears has been producing, I think I would prefer to go with Spears against the Jaguars, who do give up, if I remember correctly, lots of receptions to running backs. I think we capitalized on that a couple weeks ago. So it all has to do with Tony Pollard's health. It just doesn't seem like he's 100% there. He's still trying to play through it, but Spears seems like the better play. He's getting the pass catching and he's getting some goal line carries as well. And then, this Bigsby ETN drama, it's tough. So I've just got them sharing the backfield, and you can't really trust either, but they're probably both going to get 8 to 12 touches, and it just sort of depends on which player looks better in the first half in terms of who might get the lion's share of the touches in the second half.
Deep flexes type guys?
Yeah. Kind of desperation flexes,
Yeah. On the bad side, not actually too many of note, whether because all the good ones have the bad matchups or whatever reason. But Rico Dowdle faces the Eagles with no CeeDee Lamb. I'd be interested to know what you would interpret that means for the running back. Philadelphia is second in AFPA against the position. They are likely going to obliterate Dallas in this game. I mean, it's a divisional game, so sometimes they'll stay a little tighter than they should. But the Cowboys don't have much here. But Rico Dowdle's been largely good for most of the season. Where does he fall for you against the Eagles?
I mean, I've got him at 22, which looks like it's a little lower than the consensus this week, which is RB19. But for the reasons you mentioned, and I think I might actually, I'm looking at Rico Dowdle at 22, Dobbins at 23. I might start Dobbins over Rico Dowdle just based on game script. He could get scripted out. He has some ability to do things in the passing game and could stay relevant that way. But with no CeeDee Lamb, it just seems like Dallas could be, killed in this one, and then they're not even running the ball. you're hoping for a 5 for 50 and a touchdown from Dowdle as a receiver. But this is not a game that's shaping up to be a Rico Dowdle game.
No, and I feel like we went the entirety of the season without having a shutout, and then it feels like they've been happening in droves lately, or 2 points from a safety, and that's it, which basically counts as a shutout in the last couple weeks. This feels like another pretty decent shot at that because, good gracious, the Cowboys don't have anything, and Philly is obviously incredible. At the wide receiver position, I've got 3 teams for you with interesting depth charts, all of which have great matchups. The Jets get the Bills, who are 27th in AFPA. That's in Buffalo. The Eagles, we just mentioned, get the Cowboys without Jalen Hurts. We touched on that briefly. They're 30th, Cowboys and 30th in AFPA against wideouts. And then the Packers, which we also touched on with Christian Watson, get the Vikings, who are 31st in AFPA. So any further thoughts on the 2 teams we have talked? And then how are you looking at Adams, Garrett Wilson, anybody else there for the Jets?
Yeah, I think we covered Philly and Green Bay, so let's just focus on the Jets. And the interesting thing here, Davante Adams has really come on and is playing really well with Aaron Rodgers, but he's questionable with a hip injury. I don't know if he's officially questionable, but he's got 2 DNPs this week. So with the Jets not having anything to really play for, I wonder, how much they're going to push him to play or how much he'll push to play. Usually, he can play without practicing. But if he's in, then I think I'm probably starting him as a low end wide receiver 1, mid-range wide receiver 1, because he's out there and he's been playing so good. If he's out, then I think Garrett Wilson gets a big bump. Alan Lazard gets a big bump. Against the Bills. I mean, they're going to have to throw the ball probably to stay with the Bills. And Aaron Rodgers has been heating up a little bit lately. So that's sort of where I'm at with the Jets passing game.
Obviously, if Adams is ruled out, which 2 DNPs is concerning, listeners can check your rankings, but where would you expect Wilson would end up?
Top 20. I mean, he's at 28 right now, and he's been slipping in the rankings because he just hasn't done a whole lot lately. But you could probably expect him to see another 4 or 5 targets if Davante Adams is out, and that's enough to push him into high-end QB or wide receiver 2 range.
Very much feels like there has been a growing rift between Rodgers and Wilson that has been the cause of what you mentioned, the swing of targets towards Adams. But obviously, if Adams is out, Wilson's really all you have left to throw to. If Adams is in, I think he's by far the favorite there, at least for the quarterback. On the bad side, Cooper Kupp is a really interesting one that I want to get your thoughts on against the Cardinals, who are 4th in AFPA, and he has been sneaky bad for a while now. I've gotten a lot of questions about, can I trust Cooper Kupp at all? Jameson Williams, obviously you're starting Amon-Ra St. Brown for the Lions, but Jameson Williams, who's had some flash games, he gets the Niners, who we talked about, very good pass defense, 2nd in AFPA. And then the Chargers receivers get the Patriots, who were 9th in AFPA, helped in large part by Christian Gonzalez, and are much softer against the run, which we talked about with Dobbins and Vidal earlier. So what's your breakdown on these guys?
Well, starting with Kupp, he has a pair of 3 target games on the road here at San Francisco, at the Jets, a goose egg, and then 3 for 24 on 3 targets. But then prior to that, 5 for 92 at home against Buffalo with a touchdown, 3 for 17 against New Orleans. So I think that's also like working against him. 3 of the last 4 have been pretty bad. Prior to that, 8 for 60 and a touchdown, 11 targets, 6 for 106 and 2 touchdowns on 10 targets against the Patriots, 7 for 80, 11 for 104, 5 for 51 and a touchdown against Minnesota. So at home, he's been pretty good. 16 fantasy PPR fantasy points, 15 against Miami, 20 against Philly, and 20 against Buffalo. So I have him ranked lower than usual. I've got him at wide receiver 21. A lot of this is based on his pedigree, and he has played significantly better at home than on the road this year. Not that he's been terrible on the road, but he hasn't had a real clunker at home. So if you want to hang your hat on something, you can hang your hat on that. He's been pretty damn good at home. SoFi. For the other guys, I think Jameson Williams' expectations probably decline a little bit on the road as well due to Jared Goff's historical struggles, or just in this game, they're probably going to just run the ball down the 49ers' throats and attack the weakness of the 49ers, as I mentioned earlier. Still has the potential, though. He's been pretty hot of having a good game. So, I'm treating him like a wide receiver 3. And then the Chargers receivers, I think McConkey is a pretty rock solid wide receiver 2 type. And then after that, it's kind of anybody's guess, but Quentin Johnston has been the touchdown scorer of that group. So I would, probably lean his way over Josh Palmer.
At the tight end position, we will close out the matchups here. David Njoku is banged up. He has not practiced yet this week. But if he plays, he gets the Dolphins, who are 27th in AFPA against tight ends. If he doesn't play, Jordan Akins maybe is in a very deep, interesting streamer. People need deep streamers this time of year sometimes. Chigakonkwo, who has been the number 1 tight end in fantasy the last 2 weeks, out of absolutely nowhere, gets the Jaguars, who are 25th in AFPA, and then the Saints tight ends. You mentioned Juwan Johnson a little earlier. The Raiders are 31st in AFPA, so that is maybe the one place you could try to hang your hat in terms of playing a Saints pass catcher. What's your outlook on these guys, or any other sneaky starts you like?
Well, I like Okonkwo. I mean, you look at his numbers with Mason Rudolph. I posted on Blue Sky that, who knew that Mason Rudolph was the key to unlocking Okonkwo? But he's been on fire the last 2 weeks and has seen like major target share from Mason Rudolph. So I think he's a quality streamer this week, especially at a position where, just week to week, you're just looking for 50, 60 yards. And if you can get 5 to 8 catches out of that as well, that's pretty healthy. And maybe you get a touchdown too. These other guys, Njoku is fine. I mean, obviously DTR has his challenges passing the ball, but he did, I think, connect with Njoku, if I'm remembering correctly, 8 times last week for very low yardage. In PPR, that's fine. I just don't think you're going to get a lot of touchdowns out of this passing attack if DTR is at quarterback. I'd feel a lot better about it if Jameis Winston were plugged in at quarterback again because of his volume, and just he can make the throws, a lot of them that DTR can't. I wouldn't want to start Juwan Johnson or Foster Moreau, honestly, but if you're really stuck, Juwan Johnson is probably, outside of Chris Olave, the best receiver that the Saints have. He only saw 3 targets, I think, last week against the Packers. So in a game that they trailed the entire time. So there's just like no confidence in them. Foster Moreau, the one thing he can hang his hat on is he can catch touchdowns. They do target him in the red zone, but can they get to the red zone?
Seems very questionable. Also, for some reason, somewhere in my mind, I have this thought that Foster Moreau used to play for the Raiders. That might be completely made up. But if so, it would be a revenge game. I should probably have. He did! Up until 2022, that was the team that drafted him. Look at that. Okay, revenge game. There you go. On the bad side, Sam Laporta gets the 49ers, who are 4th in AFPA. He has been a little less disappointing than he was early in the season, but maybe still not the elite guy that you wanted. And then Hunter Henry, who's been a pretty consistent stream for much of the season, gets the Chargers, who are 1st in AFPA to tight ends. They hate tight ends. They will not allow them to score, so I don't think he ends up on the streaming radar most likely. But what are your thoughts on these guys or any others?
Henry, this is a revenge game for Hunter Henry.
True.
Former Charger, so I don't know if that matters in this one, but
it probably doesn't.
Hunter Henry, I hope he does well. I got him in my best ball final. Hopefully his touchdown last week really helped me. That was actually a funny story because I was sitting there and my son was in the room actually watching football with me, and I said, I need 85 to score a touchdown here. And he goes, okay, he's going to do it right now, and he got the touchdown.
Nice.
My son Max also picked the top 3 horses at the Kentucky Derby in order, and I was like, I'm like, maybe this kid's got like clairvoyance or something. I was accusing him of, because we were a little behind the stream. And I accused him of having seen it, and he swore up and down that he hadn't. So
Maybe
to
we
the
should
point
get
where
his prize.
my wife's like, leave him alone. He's telling you the truth. I was like, you can't. We need to go. We need to go to Vegas, son.
Yes.
I digress. Laporta, yeah. I think you're downgrading the whole Lions passing game probably in this one, just because of the run-heavy tendencies they'll probably show against the 49ers' sketchy rush defense. But Laporta could pop his head up for 40 yards and a touchdown. I think with David Montgomery out, they want to give more to Jahmyr Gibbs, but they can't give everything to Jahmyr Gibbs. So some of these other guys get some touches that they plays called for them that they wouldn't normally. Henry, I think, is an okay start, even though it's a bad matchup against the Chargers, because he has been pretty good with May at quarterback.
All right. That is it. That is all the matchups. That is all the injuries. We are to the Q&A, and there is not much to go through here. Now, there are quite a few direct start-sit questions. And to you people asking the start-sit questions, I will remind you, you can go to 444.com and go to the rankings tab, and you can choose your scoring format, and you can see exactly what John Paulson would recommend that you do with these players by just comparing where their names are in the order. So do that. But a couple things worth hitting on briefly, and then we will sign off for the season. Dave Nida, it's hard to say. Not a question, but just a note. This is my second season ever of playing fantasy football, and I'm battling for the championship. Thanks, 444. John, by the way, I'm lifelong friends with Joe Dupe? Winky face? So thank you for being here, Dave. And glad we could help. Mark C. If this week is my last week, which it should be, and Alvin Kamara is probably out, do I pick up Brian Thomas Jr.? What is he doing on waivers? And drop Kamara? Would I start BTJ, Addison, or James Conner at the flex? And would Addison or BTJ start over Adams at wide receiver? So kind of a start sit, but also some pickup stuff to be noted here. You've got to pick up Brian Thomas Jr. right now, in my opinion. Even if Al Kamara might play, which it seems very unlikely that he will, I might want to play Brian Thomas Jr. over Alvin Kamara. He's been amazing. Am I crazy?
No, like Brian Thomas Jr. was one of the primary late round, 9th round targets of draft day strategy. I've got had him on several teams. It was one of the great picks that worked out for me this year. And he's in the top 12, I think, this week in the rankings. I would certainly do this. I wouldn't expect Kamara, if he were to come back, to have a big game or have his usual workload. But it doesn't look like he's going to play at this point. So I think having Thomas Jr. as an option is certainly nicer than having Kamara as an option at this point. I probably would have Kamara ranked in, mid-range to low-end RB2 right now, given the nature of this offense. And then the second part here, would I start BTJ, Addison, or James Conner at the flex? And would Addison or BTJ start over Adams? Well, with Adams having 2 DNPs, I mean, his projection right now, he's pretty high, but if he's questionable and maybe limited today, and then questionable going in or game time decision, then I'm going to downgrade him into wide receiver 2 territory. And then BTJ will definitely be ahead of him. James Conner is a great start if he plays. So I would just keep an eye on the projections, and that's sort of where I would stand on those guys if they are able to play Adams and Kamara.
Agreed there. All right, and then we will close it out with this. Again, kind of technically a start-sit question, but a little more nuanced, and multiple people with this question. I'm sure quite a few others in fantasy championships have it as well. With Jalen Hurts out, streaming quarterback options. We hit on a lot of the fringe QB1 guys, but with some of those, a lot of them rostered, there are a lot of teams who have to look much deeper, maybe even to the Bryce Young tier that we mentioned before. So Patrick Roos and Amancer23 both asking for streaming options for Hurts. Herbert, Stafford, May, Young, A-Rod, Tua, Penix is even mentioned in the list by both. So not necessarily from these two specific lists, but just in terms of the, outside top 12 streamer guys that you like. Who are you looking at and why?
Well, I think of that list that you mentioned, plus I'm just looking at who might be available. Justin Herbert at New England, 22nd adjusted fantasy points allowed to the quarterback position. Good matchup. He's got his weapons. I think he's a good start, good solid starter. Got him at QB 14. I think Stafford's a pretty good start at home in general, and Arizona is not like an elite pass defense. I've got him at QB 15. Right now, I've got Tua at QB 16. Feeling a little dicey about that at Cleveland. We'll see what the weather is like, but he's typically pretty productive. Geno played, Caleb played, CJ Stroud played, Drake May is there at 20 against the Chargers. Chargers defense kind of started hot and has gotten a little shaky. They're 19th in adjusted fantasy points allowed to the position. Don't love May, but he's startable. I mean, I think I'd much rather start Herbert, Stafford, or Tua at this point in the week than May. And then, we talked about Bryce Young earlier. Aaron Rodgers a little bit beat up against Buffalo, but one guy that's kind of interesting is Mason Rudolph. He's been pretty solid, and he's at Jacksonville, 27th in adjusted fantasy points allowed to the quarterback position. Could have a sneaky good game. After that, it gets dicey. I mean, I wouldn't want to start Penix at Washington, 6th in adjusted fantasy points against the position, or Pickett or O'Connell, any of those guys. So I think hopefully you have better options, and I think Herbert is the clear one, but Tua or Stafford and Tua, and then Drake May are probably next up.
Did a quick check while you were going through that. It's actually expected to be reasonably warm in Cleveland, around 50 degrees, but there may be rain and wind. So keep an eye on that weather forecast. All right. That's it. That's what we've got for this show and for the year of shows. Any closing words, thoughts, suggestions, rants that you would like to share, John?
Well, I wish everybody luck. I thank everybody for their business, and even if you're not a subscriber, for coming to the live stream, and hopefully the insight that we provide, man. I think we've done a really good job with this podcast in terms of covering all the major news each week heading into the weekend, and trying to give some insight as to where guys would be ranked based on whether or not they're healthy or not, or able to play. And I am grateful that for our 444 subscribers, because they pay all of our salaries and everything like that. So I appreciate you staying with us, and hopefully you can get a win this week and pay for that subscription. And so I wish everybody the best of luck with that, and heading into a happy new year.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for being here, everybody. Thank you, John, for your insights and numbers and evaluations all year. Great stuff. We will sign off there. Good luck. Win yourself a championship. Or don't lose yourself the losers bracket thing and get punished. Adios. Happy holidays. See you next year.